Alrighty.
So, well, here we are, Pete.
Happy New Year, Dave.
Tasting wine with Pete and Dave. Yeah. Happy New Year. It's been a long time.
Between drinks.
Yeah, a bit of a break. Now, I have to admit, Pete, I have had a drink or two during the holiday season, yes.
Yeah. Actually, yeah, me too. But maybe not as much wine. While it's 37 degrees, you sort of feel like maybe a cold beer or a gin and tonic, you know.
Yes,
But
yes.
in saying that, a lot of good white wine, and as well, I think we've only got reds today, so
Yes, we do.
but that's fine. So
I'm kind of excited about this little lineup here. We've got some comparisons to make, but before we get into that, I've had a couple of people sort of ask, first timers in tasting wine, just ask, how do you go through this process? How do you identify these characters and what's going on? And I just thought I'd try to give a little bit of instruction on how to do that. And for those of you who know what you're doing already, bear with me. I'll just
keep
try
on
to
doing what you're doing.
Yeah, I'll just try to explain. I mean, first of all, what you're trying to do is you're trying to get your sense of smell and your sense of taste all working together so that you can identify things in the wine. Now, first of all, you're going to pour the wine in the glass, give it a bit of a swirl, and that's to expose more air to the wine.
That's true.
Once you've done that, you want to have a good sniff of it so that you can get the aromas that are coming out of that wine. Shortly after that, you want to take a sip of the wine, but you want to also get air going through the wine while it's in your mouth.
That's true.
Because that exposes more to your taste buds. So tip your head forward a little bit, suck a little bit of air through your lips, and that'll make a bubbling sort of sound.
Well, sort of like a burbling brook, if you were to say that. Like let the wine sort of run around your mouth a little bit and that. I mean, there's a couple of things there that you mentioned. One thing in terms of appreciating what the wine smells like, the aroma, the bouquet. People have got all sorts of different ways they analyse that, and we will often talk about an aroma or a bouquet or both. Generally speaking, people or wine folks will describe the aroma as being the fruit characteristics of a young wine, where the bouquet is perhaps used to describe something with a bit more age on it. Now, you can vary that theme a little bit in different ways, but that's one of the sorts of things that people talk about. The other thing that's really interesting in terms of what the wine smells like, which a lot of people don't realise, is that the Australian wine show system has a point score out of 20 that the judges nominally come up with for the wine. Most people don't realise that out of those 20 points, 7 of those points straight up are for the smell. You get 3 for the colour, 7 for the smell, and then 10 for the taste. So effectively, by the time you've got the wine into your mouth, most of the judges have worked out whether it's any good or not, and indeed whether it's going to get a gold medal or not. So yeah, a lot of people don't realise how important smell is in terms of evaluating the wine, and that's why it looks a bit foolish to some people. Say, well, why are we doing all this, smelling this? Who are these idiots and what are they doing? But in terms of actually getting the character of the wine, you need to be able to do that. That's half the battle before you've even put it in your mouth. So yeah, that's a very important consideration.
And to get it all working together, I think, just gives you a much more rounded sort of idea and opinion.
Absolutely, yeah, that's
what
for
that
sure.
wine is all about.
Well, I mean, one of the things that we also say to people is that it's very easy to talk in, generic terms. We describe this flavour, that flavour, it smells like this, it tastes like that, it's got tannin, it's got acid, it's got in it. But at the end of the day, we always say to people as well, like, the best way to talk to someone about wine is that you both got a glass in your hand. So we probably should do that.
Exactly. Now, the first 2 wines I've got here are blends.
Oh, okay, right.
GSMs.
Yep.
All right. Now, that's a Grenache, Shiraz, and Mourvedre.
Mataro in Australia.
Yes.
Mataro, yeah.
Now, the first one here, this comes from Rhone. Now, if I'm not mistaken, they're the people who invented this blend, are they not?
Well, more or less, yeah. Well, the thing is that these grapes all grew in that part of the world, like the southern part of the Rhone Valley in France, and yeah, they said, okay, well, we've got all these grape varieties, what do we do with them? Do we make a straight Shiraz? Do we make a straight Grenache? Do we make a straight Mourvedre? And they worked out in many cases that they worked better in combination. This one here, a Gigondas.
Gigondas?
That is an appellation, if you like, a sub-region sort of thing of the Rhone Valley. And yeah, they've all got their own little laws and conditions that they use to describe what they're allowed to do. And in this part of the world, for that wine, yeah, it's got to be predominantly Grenache. There's got to be some Grenache in it. The last time I read about it, I think it's not actually meant to be all Grenache, but it needs to be predominantly Grenache. So you're looking at
over 60%.
Yeah, is Grenache, and then the Shiraz and or the Mourvedre are used in different proportions to flesh out the rest of the wine.
Now I get that Grenache right on the nose.
You do?
But it isn't as sweet of a sensation as what I get with the Grenache here in Australia.
That's true. Well, yeah, you're getting a sort of minerally context, an earthy context with this. It's Grenache dominant, but it's not Grenache as we know it in Australia, if you could put it in those terms. It's a different style of wine. There's a savoury element to it.
Oh, savoury element is just a perfect way to describe that.
Yeah.
It's just absolutely lovely. And I get that Grenache right up front, obviously. That's got the weight there. But I get that Shiraz, and the Mourvedre, Mataro seems to have that little bit of aftertaste, which is absolutely beautiful together.
Well, I mean, again, they talk about Mataro or Mourvedre in France as being a grape variety that lends a sort of almost like dried herbs and that, and you can actually get that.
And it just lasts on the palate, doesn't it?
It does. It gives it structure, it gives it depth, but you know, the style of the Grenache that we're getting there is still full and fleshy as it is here, but with a tighter structure and a more savoury dimension, if you like, than what we are used to seeing in Australia.
Now, this winemaker makes wines here in Australia as well.
Michel Chapoutier, yeah, he does. He's a bit of a maverick. He does his own thing, and he is also involved in a number of different projects based mostly in Heathcote. He came to other parts of Australia first. He played around in Mount Benson in South Australia at one point, but now, as far as I know, his operation in Australia is concentrated on Heathcote. But yeah, and he's basically saying, well, you can bring, I guess, a French sensibility or a European sensibility to Australian wine grapes and still make a good wine. So,
yeah, beautiful blend. And out of that sort of a blend, I think we've got all sorts of things that are happening now in Australia. GSTs.
Yeah.
So, and now the next one here is Grant Burge's The Holy Trinity. Now, I'm really looking forward to this too. Grant Burge has been making this blend for quite some time. And if I'm not mistaken, he's one of the early makers of this
the GSMs,
in Australia.
Well, the Holy Trinity was one of the first, I guess, popularly known and popularly accepted blends of the GSM sort of concept in Australia. And he still makes it in, I guess, what would be called a fairly traditional style. So this is maybe old school Australia. There are lots of young gums out there who are making, you know, maybe more vibrant, fruit-driven wines in a direct style, not as much oak influence. But this is it's always been like a soft and cuddly sort of wine, this Holy Trinity.
Rosemont made some very early.
Well, they were the first ones to make, to become known for it, although the Rosemount ones were generally based on McLaren Vale fruit, where Grant Burge, of course, is the Barossa, and yeah, these grapes that he uses will always be based on Barossa.
Now, on the nose of this, I get, straight away I get that lolly shop sort of character that comes out. That sweetness, sort of confectionery, that sweetness.
And yet it's not meant to sound derogatory. It's a funny thing. When you say to people, oh, look, I'm getting that lolly shop or that confectionery character, they immediately look at you and say, oh, well, that obviously means that it's rubbish then, it's no good. But it's just a characteristic that we talk about in terms of grape varieties, and with Grenache, that's one of the things that it does.
Oh, the mouthfeel with that
beautiful,
character
supple,
is just, it fills your mouth up. And it's quite a round sort of middle palate as well.
Yeah, it is, yep.
The Shiraz and the Mataro just sort of fill in, and it's a lasting
very much so.
Flavors.
Well, 2010, so it's a gun vintage in the Barossa. Interestingly enough, the Gigondas is also 2010, so there's.
I just feel like there's all those real red berries in there as well. And I guess that comes from the Shiraz, doesn't it?
Yep.
Oh,
you're getting
beautiful.
That. But then again, you're getting a little bit of firmness and a bit of tannin on the finish, and that would be the Mourvedre. So they all contribute, you know. And you don't need a lot of any one grape variety, as we've seen with Shiraz Viognier. you can have 3 or 4% of Viognier in a Shiraz and it might do a job for you. If you get it much above 6%, all of a sudden the whole thing smells like a white wine. So you don't need a lot of any one grape variety in a mix in order for it to have an impact. So,
what sort of food would you put that with?
well, it's funny you think about it. I was just thinking about, maybe like lamb, maybe like lamb cutlets or lamb chops with the Holy Trinity, but then that would work equally with the gigondas as well.
Yes, yes.
So even though they're
in
different
fact,
styles...
I could see the mint sauce going with that really well.
Absolutely, yeah. But just the barbecued flavours, the big bold charry flavours of summer barbecues with some lamb.
Yep.
And, it would work just as well with either of those, even though they're both different expressions of the GSM style. You could use you could have the same dish and they would be it would work just as well with either one. So it's a good thing.
Lovely wine, beautiful, and what a cool little comparison. Yeah, that's great. That's great. It's a toss-up. Which one I think is my favorite? I really love those big, juicy berry flavors and that confectionery sort of character.
Yep.
But I love the complexity.
Yeah, the charry, minerally, earthy, all of those things that are in the French one. Yeah,
it is
absolutely.
really, it's a real toss-up.
Well, we don't need to say
I guess I'll have to have one of each.
You will. That's exactly right. It's like saying, what sort of wine do you want? So we don't have to say that it's better than one or the other.
I've got the Red Knot. Now, this is the 2012 Red Knot Shiraz from McLaren
From
Vale.
McLaren Vale, made by the Shingleback people, as they do.
And it's got a bit of bling there on the bottle, the gold medals. So let's give this a try. Definitely a Shiraz, isn't it?
Oh yeah.
Now this is 2012, so
it's a good vintage, 2012. McLaren Vale.
Better than 11.
Yeah, well, a more typical vintage. 11 was cool and wet in most of those South Australian heartland areas, which I'm sure we've said many times over the last 6 months. But in saying that, the 2012 is probably back to being a more typical McLaren Vale vintage, and it's the same in Barossa. It's a more typical vintage.
Yep. And I love that full-on berry fruit in that wine. That's very nice. I'm a little bit disappointed. Seeing all that gold medals on there, I thought maybe this would be a little bit bigger than what it is. And coming from McLaren Vale, it's an okay wine, but
maybe it's a bit leaner than you thought it was going to be.
It is a little bit leaner than I thought it was going to be.
It's got quite a bit of tannin as well, whether that's stemminess and maybe not all perfectly ripe fruit, or whether it's just a character in the grapes. But it's a good drink. I mean, I guess we've got to bear in mind as well that this is not an expensive wine.
No.
And so you're getting some pretty generous middle palate fruit flavour there. You'd probably want to grab hold of the Shingleback folks and say, give us a look at your top flight Shiraz and see how that compares.
Yeah.
If you want to get slightly riper fruit characters or a bit more, a bit more sort of oak complexity in it. But
I'm going to switch these two around here, Pete. I just noticed how I set that up. There was a Cabernet in front of the Shiraz, and I thought, since we're on the Shiraz,
might as well have another one.
Let's stay on the Shiraz. Now, this should be really good. I'm really looking forward to this. This is the Seppelt Chalambard 2008.
Okay, all right.
So this is going to be great, I think.
So Victorian fruit, Chalambard. This has got one of those really long, proud histories as well. Chalambard. Seppelts used to make a wine called Chalambard Burgundy back in the 60s and 50s even. So it's got a long history, this wine.
I'm expecting a bit of tannin in here just before I even get it in my mouth.
Yeah, well, that's the Chalambard style. It's an interesting thing because it sometimes polarises opinion, this particular wine, because some people think it's not as generous or as soft or as plush as they would expect from a Shiraz. There's always a firm ironstone sort of grip, a tannin grip to the Chalambard.
That grip is definitely there. But for 2008, the fruit coming out of that is just huge, and those big dark berry flavors. It's well balanced.
It's evolving very surely. I mean, you look at that, you think we're rising 6 years of age now that we're into 2014.
And it doesn't look like it's got all that much age on it either.
The colour doesn't show that.
No.
There's a bit of evolution on the bouquet. We talked before about aroma bouquet for those of you who are just starting to find your way through this minefield that is wine tasting. So you're getting characters that might be more readily described as a bouquet, because it's not just about the primary fruit. The primary fruit's still there, but it's starting to get into other territories. So,
and usually when you look at a wine, when you look at the viscous or that little edge around the glass, usually can see some brown or bricky sort of coloring. I wouldn't have never guessed, if this was a blind tasting, that was 2008.
Not from the colour, no. You might pick up a little. You might start heading a little bit more towards a bit of age with the bouquet, but you're not. It's all relative. You're not really. When you say a bit of age, it doesn't smell like it's an old wine by any means.
No. Tracking along very well. Going to have to wait and try that in another couple of years. All right. The last one we've got here is Raymil Coonawarra. This is a Cabernet 2012.
The yearling with the horse on the front. Yep,
yes.
The racehorse on the front. Okay, so this is their entry-level range. These guys have been in pretty good form over the last couple of years, the Raymils. They went through a bit of a dull patch 2 or 3 years ago, but the last couple of vintages have been more consistent, and they're doing justice to their terroir, as they call it, the place that the wine comes from. Coonawarra is renowned as a place.
Blackcurrant and plums.
Oh, look, that's beautiful on the nose. That really is a very supple, fruit driven. There's black currants, there's a bit of plum, as you say, but it's varietal Cabernet.
Yeah,
and you're talking about a bottle of wine that you will normally pay well under $20 for. You're not going to get too many Cabernets that have got that sort of varietal character when you're not paying a whole lot of money for it.
Wow, I get that in my mouth, and the first thing I noticed is some of those typical Coonawarra characteristics. I think there's a little bit of that. How do you describe? A little bit of a chalkiness, sort of a character that.
Well, that's the dryness. That's the dryness and the tannin. It is also a Coonawarra characteristic, and you often get that even in Coonawarra Shiraz. You'll get a dryness there, but that's
lots of fruit as well.
Oh, absolutely, boatloads of fruit, and nicely understated oak. That's the one thing you don't want in a young Cabernet. If you're going to be looking at something you can drink sooner rather than later, an approachable wine, you don't want lots of oak. And there's oak in it, but it's beautifully handled. It's a good drink, and it's a nice sort of a style of wine to introduce to people. Say, well, this is Cabernet and it's Coonawarra. And that's what it does.
Great. Well, great little lineup for the first one. I'm back after holidays.
Indeed, yes. Yeah, we might have to see if we can find some white wine next week. But no, that's pretty good. If you're happy to drink any of those wines, and I would be, I'd have no problem. If anybody bought a bottle of any of those around to my house, I'd be thinking, yeah, that's fine. You're allowed in the door.
All right.